Well, another God glorious victorious morning here, and I'm on the dock down by the river. Down by the river. I won't quit my day job. Yeah, so anyhow, we're here in the Trent Severn Waterway, just below Lock 13. Give you a little pan here. You see a boat sitting there waiting to go into the lock. Just beyond the boat there is the lock. You know, I did a video on, at least one on YouTube, where I mentioned about special deposit versus general deposit. And when you make a deposit with the bank takes title to the funds because it's a general deposit. At no time was I implying that banks are going to accept deposits on special deposit. The point that I'm making there is that when you make a deposit with the bank does take the title to the funds, and that's just the way it is. So, you know, you had to understand the contrast there, the difference between special and general deposit. They don't do special deposit anymore. When you had gold and silver and stuff like that, sure. But those days are long gone. And, you know, people misconstrued that, it seems. So, what that does, though, it creates what's called a creditor-debtor relationship between the bank and the depositor. And that's perhaps why a lot of people get into the secure party creditor thing. But here's the point, is that in the creditor-debtor relationship, there is no fiduciary duty attached to that. Zero. Whereas, and that's why we call it trusts, estates, and securities. Because with trusts, there is a fiduciary duty. So back in 2010, I sent a fax off to the Bank of Canada from my friend's place in Quebec, Tewksbury. You know, I sent the fax off to the bank there and suggesting that a birth certificate. All they said was real simple. I believe a birth certificate to be proof of claim to a share of assets / property in Canada. Hour and 45 minutes later, I got a phone call from the bank, a lady named Natalie, whose name is Natalie, and she said, not us, contact the government of Ontario. Didn't ignore my fax, didn't say it's bogus or anything like that. She said, not us, contact the government of Ontario. That's who issued the birth certificate. And obviously I included a copy of that in the fax, with the fax. And this is why I'm kind of harping on the point that a birth certificate was never intended to be a personal identification document. And I've used the analogy, the metaphor of it being like a coat claim ticket. You know, you check your coat into a coat check clerk there to go in a restaurant, whatever, and they give you a little ticket. And when you want to go home, you present the ticket and get your property, your jacket back. So you think about what I faxed to the Bank of Canada there. It's a very similar situation then, that the birth certificate is proof of claim. It's not evidence of your identity. People got to be real clear on that. Government does not register people. So that's why it begs the question, okay, so it's not an identity document, then what the heck is it? And we've all used it as an identity document, as I've said in previous videos. Yeah, you have the choice to do that, at which point now you're claiming ownership, which you don't really own. And let me put it this way, if you own the home, then why do you need to get permission to make changes to it? In other words, if you owned your home, actually owned it outright, exclusively, you would have no need to apply for a permit with any entity to make changes to it. Whereas right now you do. So clearly we're talking a trust situation here. And there is a fiduciary duty, as I say, attached with a trust relationship, not creditor debtor. That's really the distinction. The reclaim your security stuff sure looks like a creditor debtor situation, but it's not. Big difference between creditor debtor, which is a contractual type relationship, and trust, which is creates a fiduciary duty. No ifs, ands, buts, or maybes. Back in about 2005, I think it was, a friend of mine, I just spoke to him a week and a half ago, actually. I hadn't talked to him for about 15 years. You know, he was involved in a landlord-tenant dispute, It wasn't for unpaid rent. He was the tenant, alleged tenant. And the only reason the landlord wanted him out because the landlord wanted to sell the property, and so John took the opportunity there to deposit the certified copy of the registration of live birth, the statement of birth document with the landlord-tenant tribunal thing there, and got that into the file. And then when the day that the hearing was to be had, downtown Toronto, he showed up and he signed in as the alleged tenant. And when they called his particular matter, or that matter, as soon as they called out a lawyer from the Office of the Attorney General of Ontario, it's the chief law officer for the government, the king, the queen, walked up to John, my friend John, and he says, "What do you intend to do here if they proceed today?" And John replied, "File criminal charges." And the lawyer for the Attorney General, Officer of the Attorney General, said, "I figured as much." At which point he stood up in front of the tribunal and told the tribunal, "This tribunal does not have jurisdiction over this man." Oh, one thing I forgot there was when the lawyer approached my friend John, first thing out of his mouth was, "Do you mind if I call you Johnny?" He asked permission. There goes a cormorant. You might see that fly by there. There it is. Cool. Bird. So he asked permission. "Do you mind if I call you Johnny?" He didn't assume or presume anything. He didn't just say, "Hi, John." No, he asked permission. And like I say, so once Johnny had indicated he intended to file criminal charges if they proceeded, then that's when the lawyer piped up and stood up in front of the tribunal, said, "I'm not here to represent the man. I'm here to mediate the matter. And this tribunal does not have jurisdiction over this man." He proceeded to point to the name on the long form statement of birth. The lawyer for the landlord was piping up, going, "Who the heck are you? Who are you? Who are you?" And the lawyer for the Attorney General kept pointing to the Attorney General badge on his lapel. And basically, he informed the tribunal that they want to investigate further before they proceed. In other words, he wasn't giving the tribunal people legal advice. He's just strongly informing them nonchalantly in a room full of landlord tenants that and lawyers that don't have jurisdiction over this man. And if you proceed, you might find yourself in some hot water. So that's just another indication, backing up what I'm saying here now. With the landlord, with the creditor debtor thing, people have misconstrued that. People have asked me questions. Well, can I go to the bank and open up a special deposit account? Look, banks are not going to do that. That all changed in the 1930s there when they resurrected the system the way they have. The only point again was to point out that when you make a deposit with the bank, unlike the olden days where you could make a special deposit, you can no longer do that. All the funds, everything you deposit into a bank is a general deposit, and your bank statement's not showing you what the bank is holding for you, it's showing what it owes you. And again, and the courts have said the same thing. It creates a creditor-debtor relationship, and once again, there is no fiduciary duty or responsibility associated with a creditor-debtor relationship, but there certainly is with trusts. Well, obviously, one of the objectives here with this whole reclaiming securities thing is to get the monkey off your back that you own property, that you're the debtor. And I'll tell you this, the entire legal system that everyone I know is involved with is make-believe. And make-believe refers to imagining or pretending that something is real when it is not. And that's what you're involved in when you're involved in the legal system. It's all make-believe. People believe they're Canadians, for example. It's impossible. Canadian is a fictional thing. It's not real. Just a mask. So the understanding of the birth certificate, what it is and what it isn't with respect to reclaiming securities, is large if people have connected the dots in their mind yet. It's exceedingly helpful understanding that the birth certificate is not evidence of your identity, because all of a sudden now you're not the debtor, you're not the applicant, as I've talked about in the rescission videos, in our playlist on YouTube under the rescission playlist. See the boat sitting down there. So what's happening here, people, also is every time you fill out an application, when you sign it, you've made a false statement. You presented something that's not evidence of your identity as if it is evidence of your identity. That's a false statement. And false statements can be made verbally or in writing, such as when you sign something expected to be true and correct. No need to lie here, nothing to fear. The truth is what sets one free. So best that one knows the truth and be sure it is the provable truth and stand firm on it. And again, the legal system has jurisdiction over what it can see, and it sees what is registered. In other words, if it's not registered and you're not registered, it can't see you. It can't recognize you. However, if you've used that birth certificate as personal identification as evidence of your identity, well, then you've just basically, again, attached yourself to the name, and the name they can see. So now you and the name are one and the same, and bang, you're now involved in make-believe. So now that you know a birth certificate is not evidence of your identity, and again, identity meaning sameness of being, meaning that you're the person or the entity named on the birth certificate, but is proof of the registration of the birth and the name on the birth certificate, and you've incorporated the rescission aspect of this, if applicable, at least mentally, so you can verbalize it when needs be. You ought also know that to present the birth certificate as evidence of your identity, or to accept that you is the person named on the birth certificate, the registered name, you say, yes, I am John Paul Smith, blah, 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 or be forced or coerced to do so, you and whoever may coerce you would be complicit in committing an offense. It's an offense to make a false statement. And think on what I just said and how you can use that understanding to avoid peril. And do think it through. People take a lot of stuff I take here literally, like I said with the special deposit versus general deposit. It's all for thinking things through. Banks are not going to accept anything on special deposit. Anyhow, you don't have to accept being forced or coerced to partake in an offense, certifying something is true and correct that's not true and correct. Oh, they'll love you to do that, you see, because once you attach all that birth certificate name to you, and it's evidence you don't know what's going on, so every time they charge that entity, that person, or you think it's you, you basically are authorizing them to tap into your estate unknowingly. And that's their objective for all the people in ignorance who don't know what's going on here. And when you get over the hurdle that the birth certificate is not evidence of your identity, then they can no longer tap into your estate and get you on the hook for all of that debt. So you don't have to accept or be forced or coerced to make a false statement. Just pointing out to whomever what he, she is asking you to do and how they implicate themselves. In other words, if somebody's saying, well, you need to sign this and say that you're John Paul Smith, it could be in court, it could be in an application. Again, you got to think it through. But for example, the judge is trying to impose it on you, well, then maybe you just want to mention to the judge, well, you're asking me to make a false statement here, and you're implicating yourself in the process. You all know that a birth certificate is not evidence of your identity. See, the thing here in Canada, it's the same for all other countries, except here I'm going to use the king and the queen, because that is the owner. That is the big cheese here in Canada. Every country has a big cheese. But in Canada, the big cheese, as of now, is the king. So everyone that works for the king, and I can tell you this, and I've got it right from our own website, that the government of Ontario, all the people that work there, they all represent the king. And so the king knows what a birth certificate is and isn't, and so do all of the representatives. Because it's all the same one crown, right? They're all representing as if the king. They're not the king, but it's as if they're the king when they're doing what they're doing in their official capacity. So when a judge is sitting on a bench and you're in the court situation and the judge is trying to get you to accept that you're John Paul Smith, and you know that that's not true, then basically he's asking you to commit an offense, to make a false statement. And he's implicating himself in the process if you know this and you need to say it. And of course, we know that everything starts with the birth certificate, the registration of birth followed by the birth certificate. That's the foundation. That's the beginning of all of this nightmare that people find themselves in. And that is what governments have jurisdiction over. That's what the legal system has jurisdiction over. That registered name, not you, that registered name. If you want to free yourself from that, you need to listen up and do some studies and do some thinking. And if you really want to get to the nuts and bolts of it, then I recommend you get our information package. And you find the information how to access that in the show more under this video. Click on the more button. All the information's down there. How to get our package, so on and so forth, the cost, fees, blah, 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 what's included, it's all there. You can also contact us through the blog and request additional information, which will be the same information you're going to get access to if you click on the show more button under this video. A lot of people want to deal with these matters in court, as I've stipulated before, previously many times. I stopped going to court. Not encouraging people to do that, but I don't care what they do in the court. And it depends on the situation. If there was jail time involved, then I would take a different approach if it's only a debt, if it was only a debt matter being heard in that court, like a traffic fine or whatever, any kind of financial situation. You might find yourself getting a bill in the mail or having to pay. I don't care what happens there. Or that's what I eventually came to learn, is that it doesn't matter. Nothing to do with the little thing. You have your little court thing, get the stuff in the mail, and then send it off to a proper place. Pointing out, as you know, you issued the birth certificate. It's not evidence of my identity. It's on your certificate. It's proof of my claim, and settle up the debt. In other words, take care of it. But anyway, I don't want to put words and thoughts in people's mind here. Really, it's people got to think these things through. It's really just understanding the nuts and bolts of what's going on here. And again, it all starts with the birth certificate. Once again, a birth certificate is not evidence of the identity of the bearer, and the government does not register people. That's right there. They got the name is registered, but you're not. The name they can see, they can't see you unless you have attached yourself to that name and done things, and we all did everyone I know anyhow. And it's just gone on for a long time. Like Judy Hartman said when we met with her, a birth certificate was never intended to be personal identification. It evolved. Or we did it. And shame on us for doing that. If we had a connection with our creator, we never would have done that. Knowing that we turned when we did that. I've got stuff on our YouTube channel about the Uterman as well, if you watch the videos. So sometimes you want to deal with these things in court. Sometimes you don't. Depends what it is. You can't ignore them. You have to face them. If just ignoring it's not going to make it go away. It's going to compound problems for you. People rejecting mail, people rejecting processes, people not showing up in court when it's prudent to do so. Meaning you're going to come and arrest you and dig a deeper hole. If you don't know what's going on, you're going to be in deep doo-doo. But again, like a debt matter, no big deal. Not my debt. See, when you know you're not John Paul Smith and you use their own evidence against them, then you're not the owner of the property. And if you're not the owner of the property, you're also not owner of debt. Think about that. If you don't own any property, you don't own any debt. Not possible. And you don't own any property. Again, if you own the home that you're in, if you owned it, you wouldn't need to go to somebody else to get a permit to make changes to it. The fact that you do need to get a permit to make changes to it, that's telling you you're not the owner. And I don't care what people think. Oh yeah, you might have claim to a beneficial interest as if you're playing a part of John Paul Smith. And that is the taxpayer. That is the one that's got to apply for the permit. But you don't. And you don't have to pay for it either. Just about out of battery power here. I'm doing this one in 4K. Again, with the Sony A7R5. the 24 to 70 millimeter 2.8 lens, zoom lens. So yeah, if people want to get more detail on this, I recommend you consider our information package. Up to you. A lot of information there, and we have Zoom meetings on a regular basis. One per month now. We got so many recordings there we're not going to add to the pod anymore, but we do one Zoom meeting per month. Second Wednesday of every month. And that's where people can ask questions or just listen in, whatever, and everyone gets access to the recordings as well. And for those who are going to full-on reclaim your securities, knowing that the birth certificate is not evidence of your identity, that the government doesn't register people is huge. What you are is the benefactor / grantor. You're the one that's transferring or causing the titles to be transferred. It's coming from you, right? You're the one sitting down to do the transaction, yet you're doing it in the name John Paul Smith. But it's like I said in a previous video, it's like the government took our ownership of property. It's all been pledged, including your labor, to back the government debt. Government obligations. So when it comes time for government to pay the debt, it's your debts they got to pay. Isn't that what the president said? America will pay the debts of the people? Why would they do that unless they took your ownership of property and put it into trust, which creates, as I say, creates a fiduciary relationship. Big difference between creditor-debtor relationship and trust relationships. There's no fiduciary duty associated with creditor-debtor relationship, but there certainly is with trusts. And it's my firm belief, my experience, claiming ownership and thinking you're the owner is a huge problem. Because it's not true. And so when you let go of the concept that you own something and instead of being that, take on them, the benefactor / grantor, you don't go walk around bragging about that. It's not my point. It's just knowing it in your head. But big difference from benefactor / grantor or versus debtor. Battery's just about to die here, so I'm going to stop this and put a fresh battery in there. So us playing the part of the debtor has been a big windfall for them, because when you play the part of the debtor, you're not recognizing you're actually they hold your ownership of property and you're the benefactor / grantor. So in ignorance, by playing the part of the debtor, they got direct connection now to tap into your estate. And you get to foot the bill. Ugly situation. Whereas you start dealing with the fact of the matter that the birth certificate is not evidence of the identity of the man or the woman or the bearer of presenting, or not evidence of the identity of the bearer. And that's because the government doesn't register people when they register births. Get that real clear in your head, then you can start to move forward in a completely different manner. You present that on the table that it's not evidence of your identity, and you got the evidence to prove it or back it up. And they ought to all know that, because they're all again in Canada, they all represent the king, and the king knows it because it's his law that compel the registration of births. Remember, the registration of births is not voluntary on the part of the mom and dad; it's the law. It's their requirement, and they'll do it even if you don't. That's because they needed to take ownership of all the property so they could pledge it as a security for debt, including our labor. It's going to be a large video. This one's in 4K, 60 frames per second. Seems to be the smoothest. The other camera will do 120, but most of my gear is not compatible with that. And the newer computer is, but the older stuff is not. The TV's not. So hoping a boat would come by here, but nothing coming by right now. So a couple went by earlier this morning, big ones. We had 15 boats in town the other morning there, and 10 of them were beasts, huge, 35 footers. Dinghies on board, CDs on board, big boats. I would say capable of intercoastal travel, navigation. One thing people can do here, just give you a heads up, you can write to the issuer of the birth certificate and just, a simple communication, something to the effect, it's my understanding a birth certificate is not evidence of the identity of the bearer, and also that the government does not register people. So that's what I want to know. Is that true? If it is true, you don't need to respond. If they don't respond, then they're basically agreeing with you that it's not. And it's a good possibility that they won't respond because generally they don't. But the truth is the truth. It's the truth that sets one free. And you just got to start speaking the truth. And people that have done that with the birth certificate, that success immediately, including the part about making a false statement. That John guy told you in the landlord tenant case when I talked to him there a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. Shared he was in court and basically had that conversation with the judge, and it finally got to the point where the judge was actually working with John. Judge knew exactly where he was going. He wasn't accepting the name, blah, blah, blah. He wasn't willing to make a false statement. Didn't want to implicate the judge in that or get the judge to implicate himself. So he made a friend with the judge, and long story short, John was victorious. And another thing I would add in here, people like to do a lot of stuff in letters. Pick up the phone. People who are alive can talk on the phone. People talk about proof of life. Well, not that I'm saying you need to prove your life, you're alive. They know that, but people that are alive, they pick up the phone and they talk because they can. Corporations can't. You get someone else speaking for it, but legal entity in and of itself cannot talk. That's why they got representation and they put a lot of stuff in writing. People can talk, use your mouth, just talk. Pick up the phone. I would not rely on the paperwork. Other than, like I say, when you're doing reclaim your securities, you got to do the lien filings, that sort of stuff, and that's, if you're going down that path, then yeah, you got to do paperwork for that. Security agreements, lien filing, assignments, blah, blah. But there again, the understanding of the birth certificate, what's going on there. That's why I say you're the grantor. Who thinks granting the credit? You are. But as long as you're appearing as John Paul Smith or appear to be John Paul Smith, or it's assumed and presumed you're John Paul Smith, and you're not granting any credit. You're the debtor. The bank issued the credit. Got a goose floating down here. You can see that little goose there or not. Just below that house there in the background. The lone goose. Goose on the loose. That's why I say understanding the birth certificate stuff is exceedingly helpful for people doing the reclaim your security stuff, or for no other reason to help you understand why we do what we do there. And for people who don't want to go down that path, some people don't care about that. We see it a little bit differently, or they do, and we don't need to do the recoupment. It was never meant that we do the recoupment. That's where they fight tooth and nail not to let you get that recoupment. But as long as they're paying the bills, what the heck do you need the recoupment for? So the knowledge of the birth certificate can help you get there pretty quick. I don't know if you can see that or not, but they're letting the water out of the lock there now. There'll be some boats or something coming down, or one's going to go up. I don't know. I don't see one coming. Did I just put my face in front of the camera? Part of my hat. think it was Goosey. Look at that. We got some great shots last year when the geese were landing. While the water's splashing up in their feet. They just kind of ski for a bit before they actually the body hits the water. A lot of stuff you see from the camera when you play it back that you can't see with the naked eye. It just happens so fast. And I'll tell you this, birds are experts at what they do at flying. Unbelievable. Stuff I never thought about before until I started photography, got into photography. So yeah, if you're not John Paul Smith, the registered name, and you're not, but you've clarified that and dealt with that, or you're dealing with that, you're just saying it. And again, there's no authority in any legislation anywhere, and you can have a look for yourself, that says a birth certificate is evidence of the identity of the bearer. It doesn't exist. The source of the authority has been yourself. Believing. Well, if I want to get a job, if I want to do this, I want to do that, I got to say that's me. But people never thought about it that way. They just did it. But it's not you. So when you're dealing with that or dealt with that, however you get there, i.e. government doesn't register people, and you gather up the evidence for that and speak to it, or just challenge the court or whoever. Or show me the authority that says that's evidence of my identity. But what authority are you recognizing me by that name? Where are you getting it from? See, now you're starting to put the truth on the table, and that's how you're going to set yourself free. So once you're not perceived or presumed to be the debtor anymore, then who or what are you? Well, you're the man and the woman. It's the grantor, the benefactor. And that establishes now a trust relationship and a fiduciary duty. As I say, unlike a creditor-debtor relationship, which is a contractual relationship, there is no fiduciary duty there. So again, reclaiming your securities, dealing with the trust aspect, and secure party creditor looks like the same thing, but it's not. It's not even close. Yep, still no boat coming. They're making you dizzy. Yeah, just about running. Lock is almost empty there. Then they'll open the gates, and if there's a boat in there, it'll be coming out. And if you haven't caught on here, we're talking about this birth certificate not being evident. One day it's, you thought it was evidence of your identity. Now you're dealing with the fact that it's not. There's no simpler way to correct your status. Did you hear that? No simpler way to correct your status than right there. Not evidence of my identity. I'm not the debtor. I'm not John Paul Smith. The government doesn't register people. It's my proof of claim to share of assets / property in Canada. Don't take that literally. Don't go running with that. It says for your edification to understand that. So yeah, it's a very quick way to correct your status. From debtor to benefactor / grantor, the other end. You're on the front end now instead of the dead end. So basically, a birth certificate is not evidence of your identity, it's evidence that you have an interest. And that's what my friend did in traffic court a number of years ago when he went into I've shared this, but traffic court. He had a driver's license, all that sort of stuff. Traffic ticket was issued, blah, blah, blah. First time in court, walks up to the prosecutor. It says I'm here to present this birth certificate not as evidence of my identity, but evidence of my interest. And I'm here to release my interest for the settlement of any and all charges. Point being, he acknowledged it not as evidence of his identity, truth, but evidence of his interest, truth. Right there is a big change of status. And that case was over. He didn't file any paperwork, didn't do up letters and look for notices. Nope, he just said what he said, and he spoke the truth, and it was over. Now, he'd also had some experience under his belt, so he didn't just go in there winging it. It's a cool house over there. And that's what gives you standing, having an interest. If you don't have an interest, you got no standing. You can't partake in something if you don't have an interest. I mean, as far as making a claim. No, you can't claim an interest in my car if you don't have an interest in my car. You got no standing. With that birth certificate in your hands is evidence of your standing, pardon me, of your interest, not your identity. And as I say, big change, big bit of information there with respect to, yep, you're changing your status just by doing that. It can be done in writing, it can be done verbally. Depends what your objective is, what you're moving on here. So it's kind of like, I'm not saying for certain, but it's all the stuff that we've made applications for this, social insurance, SSN, bank accounts, passports, all sorts of stuff. But at the end of the day, it seems that none of that matters as long as you acknowledge the birth certificate in and of itself as evidence of your interest and not your identity. Then that can be used to settle whatever, because like I say, it is a trust relationship and there is a fiduciary duty here, and well, it's their duty because they've taken the ownership and given you a certificate evidencing your interest. In the absence of claiming that interest, you're the debtor, and that's what gives them the authority now to tap into your estate that you could otherwise authorize them to tap into to settle whatever, should you so choose to do so. I think I'm at the end of the video here. Nothing more really to add. Yep. God bless. Let God never fails. And until next time, ciao for now.